That's the hero gig. Part of the journey is the end. Here to talk about Avengers Endgame. It's been 5 years. I never doubted that Endgame would work because they hadn't really given us a reason to doubt that it would work, but it also felt like if they didn't nail every single aspect of it, it would feel tragic because we were also deeply invested at that time. But I didn't doubt it for a second. I didn't doubt that they would pull it off. It was gonna be our final go around with Tony, with Cap. We didn't know exactly what the nature of that goodbye would look like, but we knew it was the end of something with that group of people. And I think we knew heading in that it was gonna be magical, and it was. Iron Man, the first Iron Man film, came out in May of 2008, the exact week that I graduated college. And so the first Iron Man movie, because I'm an old person, you watching at home, you might be a young person, but I am an old person. And that was the last movie that I watched with my college friends up in Syracuse at Carousel Center. And so I've always associated the Infinity Saga and the birth and dawn of the MCU with this like pivot point in my life, right? The end of a thing and the beginning of a new thing. In that case, adulthood and professional responsibility, which is a lot. But the MCU was fun and vibrant, and especially now, like phase 4 into phase 5, I think we collectively have a tendency to forget that it was pretty rocky there on a film-to-film basis for a while. Also, 3 of the first 7 MCU movies were Iron Man movies, another thing we tend to collectively forget. So you didn't really know in the early days, just like the people making the MCU didn't really know in the early days, like what exactly it was gonna be. By the time we got into phase 3, we were watching like one of the most unprecedented runs of not only success, but achievement in the history of Hollywood. You are going year after year or multiple times inside of 1 year, and you're getting treated to films like Captain America Civil War and Doctor Strange and the second Guardians film and Spider-Man Homecoming. And then of course we're building toward Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther and then into Infinity War. And the thing about that moment was like, not only were the movies good and the movies fun and the movies like animating a lot of excitement among the fandom, but everyone felt like it was ushering in something new and meaningful, whether that was about the tonal recalibration of a character like Thor in Ragnarok, right? Or incredibly consequential and seismic character introductions. Everything felt like it had heft. Like, we talk now about the fading nature of monoculture. When these MCU movies came out, it was like, that's what monoculture was. It was the thing you knew everybody was gonna share in real time and wanna talk about together. I think 2 things were different heading into Endgame than into Infinity War. 1, obvious, but let's just say it, we had seen Infinity War, right? We had seen the snap. And I think I consider Infinity War one of the 2 best MCU movies ever made. I think on a consumer by consumer, fan by fan, viewer by viewer basis, mileage may vary on whether you were like the snap. I have never been so emotionally shredded by a viewing experience, or whether you were like, logically, the characters who the future of the MCU were built on cannot be dead, and they will be coming back. And so I have been like emotionally manipulated in a way that I do not appreciate or believe in. I was in the former camp. I remember seeing Infinity War for the first time and gripping Chris Ryan's arm. He does not remember that we saw this movie together. Devastating. Very memorable experience for me. And shaking like a leaf and weeping like a baby, watching Peter Parker say to Tony Stark, I don't feel so good. And so we had no idea heading into Endgame that there was gonna be a time jump. We didn't know how they were going to bring those characters back. I think we all knew rationally that they would, but that didn't for me in any way dampen or diminish the excitement of finding out how. The other thing about Endgame though was that we saw nothing. Think about the way that movies are marketed. Posters, interviews, trailer after trailer after trailer, to the point where a lot of people now, I think, I love a trailer, I go frame by frame, I sometimes do 2.5-hour podcasts on 1.5-minute trailers, I'm a sociopath. I think some people now are like, I will not watch a trailer because there's too much in it. They're gonna show me too much of the movie. Not so with Endgame. They did these like high concept, high art, almost like mood ring renderings of what it had meant to grow attached to Tony Stark and Steve Rogers and Natasha, etc., over the past decade plus, they showed us nothing. Even the people who went to press junkets or conventions or had interview access, you would maybe get a crumb. It also, because we hadn't seen anything, I think really fueled in a fun internet way the memification of the event in the weekend. Like, again, because the long night episode of season 8 of Game of Thrones was coming out, there was this big shared how many Starks will we lose moment on the internet. Everybody was very concerned about the Starks of Winterfell, and everybody was very concerned about Tony Stark. And even though Game of Thrones and the MCU are different, distinct things, it did feel so keenly heading into that weekend like the people we had spent 10 years of our lives with risked being ripped away from us. That's like a unique thing to bring into a movie when you buy your popcorn and your Sour Patch Kids and you sit down for 3 hours. So here's what I was thinking when I sat down to see Endgame at last. It's 3 days before the movie comes out. We're here at a screening. We're on the Disney lot. Also, it is 9 a.m. It is 9 in the morning, which is a very strange time to sit down to watch Avengers Endgame. And I was bringing the personal and the professional into that movie theater with me. I was there with Sean Fennessy. He had invited me to cover the film with him on a little podcast you might have heard of called The Big Picture. My preferred method for covering movies and television shows and books is to consume them as many times as is humanly possible before I am responsible for talking about them. And that was not something that I got to do for Avengers Endgame. And so I felt I need to allow myself the sincere emotional response that I want to have here. And also I need to make sure I'm filing all of this away. And Sean took a bathroom break during Endgame. And it was the scene when Bruce Banner and the Ancient One explain how every part of the time travel plot works, how the stones will be returned to their original position, thus preserving the timeline. And I have to tell you, when I saw Sean get up and then that began to happen, I thought I was already feeling stressed about remembering all of this. But now it's also my responsibility to make sure Sean understands this so that we can pod about it together. And then I thought, meta, you know? This is what teamwork is all about. Sean has been a comic book reader like his entire life. He, I think, was like, this is what it looks like to do this right, you know? And had a blast. Was he weeping openly in public like I was? He was not. He was more composed watching the film than I was, but I think that's part of why we've been, you know, successful creative partners for so long. We're very different in that respect. You know, you just knew in real time it was going to be something that animated a lot of like excitement and discussion. And I mean, that's part of the joy of working at The Ringer. It's part of the joy of what we do here is like leaning into people's passions and obsessions. And so getting to participate in that in real time with Endgame was something that I really cherished, and getting to share it with Sean, who's one of my best friends in the world and also a huge nerd who really loves Infinity Stones, was awesome. I will never forget the way my jaw hit the floor when 5 years later popped onto the screen. I don't know how many Battlestar Galactica heads are out there, spoiler, but like that was the thing it reminded me of most. It's like rare for a time jump like that to leave you floored but work and feel right and like not cheap. That was amazing to me. I'm like very much inclined as a person to say a thing that I love in life, to share stories, to share my passions, yes, but also a thing I love equally is to sit at home in my pajamas with my cat. But Avengers Endgame is like why movie theaters exist, right? That's why you want to go out and be in the world with other people who love a thing as much as you do. And there were so many moments in the movie that celebrated that compulsion. Part of what I love about it is it feels like the experience of having seen it for the first time is like embedded in amber in my heart. Like I remember what it felt like to watch Mjolnir start to tremor, start to shake, and you're just like, since I watched every person in that scene try to lift Mjolnir in Age of Ultron, I have known in my heart and my soul that Steve Rogers could lift it, that he was worthy, and that he chose not to. And when that hammer swung and the camera swung with it and we watched Captain America wheeled Mjolnir, I was like, is this what it feels like to be alive? It was just amazing. It was incredible. I love hearing Kevin Feige and all the other folks who have helped shape the MCU over the years talk about how, you know, we got the cutaway, right, at the end of Ultron, like the decision to wait, to hear somebody say Avengers Assemble out loud, and what it felt like to watch Captain America finally shout it. Like, you could still go on YouTube now and you see all the reaction videos of everybody in the theater screaming together. It's of course hard to overstate how emotional the conclusion of Avengers Endgame is. And that's in part because it was so sad, right? It was so hard to say goodbye, but also I think just as palpably because of how happy we were, both like the relief that you feel as a fan that they did it, they landed the plane, they ended it right, they nailed it, it was beautiful, it was perfect, it was meaningful. But also because like we were so proud. We were so proud of Tony. We were so proud of Cap. We were so proud of everybody and the decisions that they made. Tony meant so much to so many of us, not only because he's Iron Man, he's cool, he's funny, but because he's a human being, and that was part of his insecurity. I'm just a man in a can. That's what makes him relatable. Now, we are not all geniuses, billionaires, playboys, and philanthropists, but Tony Stark was a character who decided to give a shit and then made a difference. And he was always afraid that he wouldn't be able to, or that he would try but it wouldn't be enough, that he wouldn't be able to protect Pepper, that he wouldn't be able to save Peter. And that was why he erred so often. That was why he wanted to put a suit of armor around the world. And everything about his individual arc and compulsions, everything about the shared journey that he went through with other people, the people who made him better, the people who he impacted too, was present when he ripped those stones away from Thanos. When we see Thanos snap because he thinks he has them, and we realize like Tony beat him with his brain, right? He figured out how to get them into his gauntlet. And he knew that there was no way, that he would survive that snap, but it didn't matter. And so we get this like spine-tingling callback to the end of the first Iron Man film, I am Iron Man, the words that launched the MCU, the sentence that changed Hollywood. Like, that is not an exaggeration to say. We get a callback, a perfect bookend to that moment. I am
Iron Man.
Perfection. Part of the journey is the end, and that's what makes it meaningful. Like, that's what makes it feel real. It can't go on forever. Nothing does. And that's what allows us to like cherish the time that we spend with other people. And that's a pretty like big existential idea for a Marvel movie to give us, but it did. I think the moment that it really felt like the end was when the credits roll, and it's a very different style, right? We are really toasting and celebrating in a prominent fashion not only each of the characters, but the performers who brought these characters to life. And there's a part of your mind as a MCU consumer, right? A seasoned vet of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's like, man, what are the stingers gonna be in Avengers Endgame? This is a pretty big moment. What will they choose to set up next? And then they didn't. Instead, we heard the sound, just the sound of Tony Stark hammering from that Mark I construction. Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps. Now, Obadiah Stane was referring to the Mark I armor, but I think also now we know that that was about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so what a perfect way to end. And people were like a wreck hearing that, because it felt so perfect in its subtlety, right? It wasn't actually like grand and showy. It was really quiet and quick and gentle. Almost, I think some people almost like missed it. It was so fleeting. But What a beautiful way to say goodbye, just to take us back to that first sound where we watch the thing take shape in front of us. Amazing. The movie ends. What was going through my mind? I was processing like the loss, right? You're almost grieving because you had to say goodbye to Tony, and that's such a sad thing. And also just grieving the end of, again, with the caveat that Far From Home was still to come, and I think is a lovely little coda, the end of a thing that was such a central part of our lives for so long. So I was very much in a like emotional state of mourning for fictional characters in a fictional universe that I adore, and then very quickly I was like, Clint Barton should have gone over the edge instead of Natasha. That was pretty quickly what I started to think about, really quickly. And then I was like, did the time heist make sense? Are we sure that's how time travel worked? I just couldn't help but kind of immediately kick into that gear, but never at the expense of just how satisfied I felt. Like, what an incredibly satisfying movie-going experience Avengers Endgame was. I think on the one hand, Endgame and the Infinity Saga, like, it's lightning in a bottle. It's the kind of magic and the kind of alchemy where every single ingredient, everything you put into that stew has to be perfectly calibrated. And you can't just work off a recipe sheet. It's the movie-making dragon that the MCU and all of us have been chasing ever since. But if we never quite replicate that feat, it will be okay, because, you know, we think back to some of the wisdom that we got from Vision and from Ultron and from all of our characters over all of the time that we spent with them in the MCU. It's about that moment in time together. My mom emailed Joanna asking her to convince me to go to the eye doctor. It's very embarrassing. I am a 37-year-old woman.